Lovely. Well, a very good morning to you all and welcome to our eLN webinar. I'm absolutely delighted that you're joining us today. I'm Jane David and I'm one of the volunteer eLN board members, and I'm really excited to be hosting today's webinar. As you can see, we are joined by Eleanor Hamilton and Ed Garner from eLearning Voices, who are going to be sharing some insights into finding voices for your eLearning projects. Absolutely excited for today's session. Eleanor, would you like to come onto the screen and join us and take us through your presentation?
Hi, yes, I'm Eleanor Hamilton. I've worked in the voiceover industry for 20 years. For 15 of those years, my husband and I were a busy pair of freelancers, voicing everything from commercials to transport announcements. And you may well have heard us because we're two of the voices on the London Underground who never shut up. I'll tell you which train you're about to catch, and Phil will tell you to mind the gap. A few years ago, we realised that the e-learning industry was developing rapidly and that it needed a whole variety of different voices offering different specialisms. So we began to create e-learning voices.
Good morning, I'm Ed. I'm not a voiceover, my voice is rubbish. I spent the past 25 years in consulting for business and technology, but I'm a neuroscientist by background and I have a particular interest in the psychology of learning. So this morning, we'd like to talk to you about three things. We'll take a look at the world of voiceover and we'll explore what's applicable to e-learning and what's not. Then we'll explain how to use voiceover to reach the increasingly diverse audience of learners. And finally, we'll show you how to seek out and find the right voice artists, the different voice companies and platforms, and the pros and cons of each.
Sounds fantastic. Can I just ask, Eleanor, we can't see your camera. Can I just check that you've got your camera on? So you might need to select start again.
Let's have a look. Is that better? Can you see me now?
Nope.
Oh.
Can I hear you?
Yeah, I was on before, wasn't I?
Definitely on. So you haven't got a red line going through the stop video?
No, I've stopped it and I'll start it again now. Oh, that's a shame. I put lipstick on and everything. That's really strange.
There's make sure that you've selected the right webcam.
Yeah.
There's a little
Yeah. See, I'm audio only.
It's about audio, so absolutely fine. I'm going to go on mute, and it's over to you guys.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, we've been using this this camera for all morning, but never mind. Okay, never mind. Okay, well, Ed, I think you're going to talk about the different types of voices that there are out there.
Yeah, so let's start with this. I mean, the first thing to say is that there are many voiceover artists out there, and pretty much all of them, as you'd expect, have interesting and pleasing voices. What's more interesting here, though, is that different industries use voiceover for different reasons. So TV and radio especially been using voiceover adverts for decades. Private enterprises increasingly use voiceovers for corporate videos, and then Xbox and PlayStation games, significant users of voiceover. And we're all familiar with audiobook narration nowadays, and often attracting A-list voice actors like Stephen Fry. The important thing here is that every voiceover artist tends to have one or two particular specialisms.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't know anyone who's proficient in all of these areas. I started my voicing career in radio, then corporate narration and announcements. I've recorded quite a few TV commercials over the years, but since 2010, I've only really concentrated on e-learning. Some artists will only read audiobooks, some might have a voice and style that only suits animations or video games. And there's a tendency in this business, I think, because many voiceovers are freelancers, to try to do every single job that comes in, and that's understandable, but it's also important to play to your strengths and to know your weaknesses as well. And the really successful voiceovers know their specialisms and they build their careers on it. So, for example, Red Pepper is a guy who's best known for his movie trailer voice and has made a career out of voiceovers a bit like this.
In a world where one man, bloody, 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 coming soon.
And he sounds amazing, but he wouldn't have the right voice for 20,000 words of e-learning about North Sea oil and gas, and he knows it. And meanwhile, I could read a movie trailer, but I couldn't do it with the skill or gravitas of Red Pepper. So he and I both work in front of a microphone all day. We both record the occasional TV or radio ad, but we don't compete for work with each other. We operate in two entirely different markets.
Yeah, that's right. So some industry sectors will accommodate a broad spectrum of voicing styles and proficiencies. Others won't. And e-learning is one industry where the voiceover has to have quite specific attributes.
Yeah, so for anyone who wants to be a voiceover for e-learning, the general guidance is that you shouldn't try to be too versatile. Voiceovers for e-learning content will typically be either narrator or a specific character actor. They're very different styles. For character scenarios, it's important to bring some life and a bit of performance to the script. But in my experience, very few character actors are really suitable for kind of long form narrations. And I mentioned earlier about the London Underground job, which is quite a good example. It's not really relevant to e-learning, but it is the sort of job that everybody thinks that they can do. But actually, to impart serious information in a busy station isn't quite as easy as you might think. So I'm about to play you a clip of what not to do. Sadly, my husband died 4 years ago, but his tube announcements are still used every day. And obviously they would be, because they've been recorded already. There's no need to change them. But after he died, believe it or not, I received phone calls and auditions from people who thought there might be a vacancy for the Mind the Gap job. And I'm talking about these calls coming in within hours of his death, who thought they'd be far better placed for the job now that my husband was dead. And they sent unsolicited auditions to me, his widow. And this one was my personal favourite.
Stand clear of the doors, please. Mind the gap. Mind the gap.
And it still makes me laugh that this guy ever thought his job application was a good idea. In fairness, he does not reflect the majority of people out there who are brilliant voice artists, but it's a good example of how many charlatans and wannabes are out there. So how do you, as an e-learning content creator, know how to separate the good guys from the bad guys?
Well, the first step is to get a demo, and every voiceover artist will have one of these. These are audio samples showcasing their greatest hits. Today's web technology means they're pretty easy to access, and you can play them through your phones and your laptops. So a demo can give you quite a good idea of the artist's range and their style, but it's worth being aware that there are lots of brilliant show reels out there that may well have been recorded in a different studio from their own home studio. They may not have a home studio. There might have been, you might be using audio clips that have been really professionally directed. So it's not always an accurate representation of how they would typically sound. Cheryl also won't tell you whether this voiceover is good for 10,000 words of really complex health and safety narration. So later on, we're going to give you some tips on how to go out and find voices, also what red flags to look out for. But first of all, let's look more closely at what specifically to look out for in a voiceover for e-learning. And the backdrop to this is that the e-learning industry is a great example of a sector that's had to transform to embrace design thinking. And that means it's evolved by really understanding its audience to keep them engaged. So for example, we're now moving towards more blended and micro-learning techniques using shorter snippets, vignettes, animated scenarios with maybe a quiz at the end. And what we've realized is that each of these content types needs its own voicing style.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, every e-learning slide ended with either, "That's not quite right, have another go," or "Click next to continue." And there's definitely still a market for this, especially in certain regulated industries where there's a lot of information to be given. But now, as Ed says, technology's moved on to such an extent that we're not just clicking through slides. There's still a large call for narrators, and we're still finding that a lot of e-learning, especially where there's a lot of serious content and life and death information to convey, has to be still relatively traditional in its delivery, in that the narrator plays an essential part. And choosing a good and effective one is really important, especially when it comes to learner engagement.
Okay, so at this point, we'd like to ask if you could please put in the comments area what you look for when you're trying to find a voiceover. So what's your number one requirement? What are the top criteria for you? And And I've just seen Joan's comment. Thank you. I'm going to turn my video off just because in Lancashire the bandwidth isn't always so good.
Yeah, I don't seem to be able to get mine back on at all. I don't really know why. Is my camera still off?
Yes, it is.
Oh, what a shame.
Okay, so we've got a few suggestions coming through.
Yeah, clarity is an important one. Okay, well, I can go through what we think the characteristics should be, because you may find that other things pop up as well, other ideas, but we think that a good voice is pretty much a given, and a good voice is something that, you know, is often a matter of opinion anyway, but a narrator's voice can't be monotone or uninteresting, but it does need to be neutral, consistent and very clear. I mean, remember, you're going to be listening to this person for maybe 2 hours or more, and so if they're not clear and neutral, or they have the odd vocal tick, then they might not be right. If you do a lot of long narrations, we often suggest using at least 2 different voiceovers, because any one voice artist, if they're used for every single programme that you make, they can often begin to grate if it's the only one the listener ever hears. Try mixing things up a bit. On the flip side, a character voice can be much more interesting because you often won't need to use them for much more than a sentence or 2 at a time, so you can kind of have more fun with them.
We're quite fussy at eLearning Voices when we pick our voiceovers, and there's a reason for us to be, you know, with this scrutiny. They have to have top class home studios. They also need to know how to plug in the microphone, and like the lad in the previous picture you might have spotted, they need to be working from their own studio full time, so there's no delays if you need quick changes to existing projects. But actually, it's not just the studio that's important, or their availability, or their responsiveness. One of the most critical attributes that we look for in our voices is intellect. So anyone can read words, and not everyone can read words and bring them to life. And not everyone can read words and truly understand the information that's being imparted and relay them to the listener in a way that they'll understand. Also, any material that's written by humans is likely to have some mistakes. If your voiceover doesn't really understand what's been written, how can they pick up on human error? We think a good voiceover will spot these mistakes and query them, or ask for clarification.
Yeah, I mean, scripting errors occur all the time. It's an easy mistake to write do instead of don't, for example, but in some circumstances it could lead to serious harm. I often joke with clients, I say we've never killed anyone yet, and as far as I know, it's true. But it's one reason why AI isn't really a threat to the voiceover industry. Automated voicing software wouldn't know to ask the question, and an AI voice certainly wouldn't engage the listener for 10,000 words at a time. Because the listener is human, the writer is human, and the key to imparting the information well is to use a human who understands the material and knows how to put it forth with humanity, with understanding, and with intellect. And that doesn't come from a computer, but it also doesn't come from just anyone. And it certainly doesn't come at rock bottom rates, because a good voiceover will almost certainly be educated to degree level with a decent amount of life experience behind them. And obviously a recording studio, which they not only know how to operate, but they've invested in heavily. So with long form narrations, there are always mistakes somewhere in the scripting or in the voiceover, or both. So we recommend you use a professional editor. You're bringing in an extra pair of ears, as well as somebody who'll make the audio as beautiful and as seamless as possible.
So let's talk about diversity. It's a topic really close to our hearts. And what I've found fascinating about the learning industry is how it's been able to adapt, to embrace the many ways that people now want to absorb information. It makes things a bit more difficult for content creators, different devices and interfaces, and everyone's got their own particular preference. But in all industry sectors, not just learning, but retail, banking, transport, every consumer in almost every sector demands personalized products and services. It's this that's fueled digital transformation. So digital, it's not really about technology. It actually means giving your customers and employees information that's completely customized to how they want to digest it. Technology obviously plays quite a big part, and cloud and data analytics are probably the two most important foundational elements of digital. But success in business nowadays means really personalizing your content. And to do that, you have to comprehensively understand your audience. And our audience is massively and increasingly diverse. Diversity is one of the three mandates of corporate social responsibility that pretty much every large organization has signed up to. The other two are climate change or carbon neutrality, and inclusion or accessibility. Diversity has really, political and ethical implications, but it's one of the main reasons that client organizations are actively embracing diversity is because it allows for innovation. And without innovation, a business just won't survive. Industry is simply evolving too quickly. And in this new world, post or mid-COVID, where we now know that almost everyone can work from home, companies don't need to employ only those people who live within a 30-mile radius. Their employees can live in Newcastle or Rotterdam or Mumbai. So organizations are now onboarding talent from this global, diverse pool, and they need to train them. So we have to assume that every client of eLearning content has a learner base that's diverse, multicultural, multinational, multi-gender, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, many years ago when eLearning was new, we often found that any programme talking about diversity would talk about people from all over the world, from different cultures and backgrounds. But the narrator was almost always somebody like me, relatively well-spoken and easy to understand, probably with white skin. And to be honest, a few years ago, clients thought they were being a bit out there if they asked me to turn up my northern accent a bit. And there's still a reason to use a very clear narrator, although their skin colour is irrelevant. It always has been, especially in voiceover. But it's one thing to talk about people from multi-ethnic backgrounds, but quite another to represent them on screen in a way that will keep learners engaged when you're teaching an audience from multiple continents and cultures. So if you look at technology firms or banking institutions, for example, they all have operations in Asia, Europe, and America. So how do you find a voice that resonates with everyone, where everyone feels that they're fairly represented on screen, no matter which part of the world they're working in? It's hard. And what we're finding now more and more is that some eLearning is very specific to a single region. So a more local angle is required with an accent to match. For example, you might have a brewery in Suffolk or a chair manufacturer in Newcastle. And these can be tailored so that the learner is learning from someone who sounds just like them. Meanwhile, the larger conglomerates are creating content which is used for a worldwide audience. British learners tend to be irritated by American voices, and audiences in Asia and Africa want to be represented too. Many large corporates have English as their main language. So what we're finding is that content is created in English with multiple character scenarios, and that these need to reflect the different accents spoken by the very people who work within their organisation. There's obviously also the need for localization, but for now, for ease, we'll concentrate on English delivery. It's actually quite easy to make characters and avatars with any skin colour and any outfit these days. But is it right to have a white actor playing the part of an Indian, for example? In the early days, years ago, narrators would simply change their voices to sound like they were from China or Jamaica, and nobody questioned it. No one really thought about it because they weren't visible on screen anyway. People didn't really think that it mattered, and it's not the case anymore, and rightly so. We've got a client at the moment who's been looking for an African American character for some eLearning. And although the character is a cartoon, it's absolutely vital for that client that they use a voice whose background reflects that of the character. So it's quite interesting and heartening to see how many companies are now taking responsibility for this and making sure that diversity is shown, not just on the faces of the characters, but also in the ears of the listener. But how do you find these voices? Well, luckily with the internet, it's now easier than ever to find people who represent every nationality and every regional accent, because it's not just world voices that are being represented. Local accents are wanted. They're very much available. Gone are the days of Pathé style newsreels. We expect to switch on our screen, our radio, our podcast provider, and we want to hear a wide variety of voices and accents. And they're all out there. But where do we find them? And how do we know if they're any good?
Right, so here are the 5 main routes for accessing voiceover artists. So I'm going to run through these very quickly, and then we're going to do a quiz. It's more a survey really, but we want to know how you're all going about finding voices today, because we don't think it's that easy. So we'll start with the in-house. Having an in-house voiceover capability used to be quite common with the larger e-learning organisations who had their own dedicated studios. We don't see it so much nowadays, and that's probably because most professional voiceovers have their own home studios. We also know an e-learning firm where someone in the design team has a lovely voice, and so they use her. She's accessible, it's a low-cost option, and it's just about good enough for what they want to do. More common though is the use of agencies or recording studios. A more traditional way of safely accessing a more diverse cast of professional voice talent. And there's also online marketplaces now that have a lot of artists on their books, thousands of samples, and you can, in theory, find any and every voice that you want. A fourth option, if you know what you're looking for, is to find and work with a freelancer directly, and you can develop your own relationship with him or her. And then the other option is to use a specialist who will basically manage everything from end to end. Okay, so now we'd like you to tell us for a poll which of these you most commonly use. There we are. So hopefully these results will come through quite quickly.
Yeah, we've got about 8 out of the 12 attendees voting, which is great. And I'll be sharing the results in just a second, just to give you a couple more seconds. Just the last few votes just coming in. Okay, I think that's almost everybody who's voted. So I'm just going to share the results with you.
Okay. So
here you go.
Right, so this is very interesting. Okay, so what Ellen and I thought the picture would look like was quite a high proportion of you using agencies and maybe a lot of online marketplaces. Really very few using in-house voices, which is not what the picture shows, and a bunch of you using specialists, which doesn't look like that's the way. So very interesting. It's great that a lot of you are recognising the value of going to freelancers directly. So if we go through the benefits of each and some of the drawbacks. So in-house voices, obviously low cost, payroll, and most have other additional jobs. But if you've got someone in your team who's got a good voice and it matches your content, then why not? The main downside here is what happens if they leave, or what happens if you need a male voice or two voices or a particular style. It does sometimes limit your options a bit. Quite often though, you might find that the client themselves wants to voice the material, and that's fine too.
Yeah, I mean, but over the years, we've revoiced hundreds of programs as well that clients have realised just do sound better with a professional, but it's up to them. And obviously the customer is always right. And going through an agency gives you more choice, but there are problems. So proper voiceover agencies, so for example, Excellent on the screen, they're brilliant. They have the best voices on there. But again, these guys may not have home studios or be particularly skilled at e-learning. On their website, you'll find all their voices, and they may not all do e-learning. They might be proficient in other areas, but they could be amazing for a TV commercial. In fairness, the agent will know, and they'll be able to direct you to the right person on their books and book the job in for you. You'll pay a lot more than you will do going to a marketplace, but going with a reputable agent will almost always give you some protection, and you'll also have confidence that the voice will be highly skilled. They probably wouldn't have an agent otherwise, so it's a pretty safe way of working. A studio will have a decent range of voices too, who they can call on, not necessarily as exclusive or as carefully vetted as one of the top agencies, and they'll charge a bit of a premium because you're paying for the studio time too, and usually an hourly fee for each voice. But it's pretty good value for a single voice narration, and pricey if you need a number of different characters or scenarios. On the other end of the scale are the pay-to-play sites, and you'll get anyone on there. Only a very small percentage will be e-learning proficient. You'll need to spend a bit of time going through samples to find the voice that fits your project. But the upside is you can post auditions, and they'll be more expensive than going direct. And this is why a lot of freelance voiceovers now market themselves. And the good ones will have their own website with their show reels and client testimonials. They can be a bit cheaper too because the agency isn't adding any markup or taking commission. But of course, unless you really know what you're looking for, what voice is right for your content, using freelancers can sometimes be a lucky dip. There's no real industry standard with audio production. Some have very different pricing structures from others. So one size doesn't fit all. And what if they work part-time as actors and get a big filming or theatre job that takes them away from the studio for months? What if a bit of legislation changes and you need a quick pickup, but they're not available? Now, that's not to say that freelancers are no good. That's quite the opposite. You find a brilliant freelance voiceover that you like, you'll have a relationship with them for years. We only use the best freelance voices. And if you only ever need a single voice narration, we'd totally recommend you find a freelancer or two and build a long-term relationship with them. They'll let you know if they're off on holiday for a week or two, long in advance, so you can plan ahead. It's those multi-voice projects that are complex and difficult for one single person to handle on their own.
Yes, if you have a slightly more complex project like this, then it tends to make sense to work with a specialist voiceover firm for eLearning. They'll advise you on what voice is appropriate. They'll have their own roster of pre-audition voices and a pretty good diverse range. And if necessary, they can go out and find exactly the right voice for you. And they'll obviously also manage the audio project from end to end. They'll match the various sound levels of all the voices, and they'll send you back the fully edited sound files. The main downside here of using a specialist is that they're geared towards the top end of the market, so the more complicated projects. So you probably need to be using voiceover quite regularly, or have a decent allocation of your project budget for it. You know, I'd say about £500 really is your minimum.
Yeah, so I mean, some voices are brilliant, some are less so. And I mean, one easy way to tell whether a voice is any good or not is often on these pay-to-play sites. Everyone has to write their own biography, so it's a little bit like TripAdvisor. If someone's written a 1-star review of a restaurant that you're planning to go to, but it's all in capitals with misplaced apostrophes everywhere, you're probably not going to take as much notice of that as you would do of a well-considered, fair, reasoned appraisal of what was good and bad. Likewise, if you see a biography that's badly written and you're trying to book a voice for 30,000 words of medical training, you might want to steer clear, because if they can't spell voiceover, then they probably can't pronounce pembrolizumab.
What?
Pembrolizumab is pembrolizumab. It's I think it's a cancer treatment, but it just came up in a script the other day, so I thought it sounded quite impressive. So something else to bear in mind is that these pay-to-play sites are exactly what they say they are. They pay to be listed. So if they've got the money, anyone can be on there. And once, just to test the theory, one of my voices at eLearning Voices actually signed up his dog. It's important to mention as well that if you're on Twitter and follow any voices at all, there has been a fairly major uprising against one of the pay-to-play platforms. And in fact, another one is shortly to follow, I think. It's not one of the ones listed here. It's because of the way they've been treating their voiceovers. So all the reputable voices that we know have made a mass exodus from this one particular site. And it's been quite heartwarming to see the entire industry coming together to make a stand. But it's also worth noting that the people who are left on this site aren't necessarily those who work as full-time professionals. We do have a very, very close-knit industry. It's a wonderful industry to work in, and we talk to each other, we share ideas, and we stand up for one another when we feel that we need to.
Yeah, it's been really good to see that solidarity in the community. Okay, so here's our top tips. So if you're looking to find voices but have pretty low budget, then DIY works, or even ask your client to voice it. Just be aware that this can quite often lead to you having to do it again, which won't be so economical. If you want a high level of quality, then agencies and specialists will guarantee that, and you should find it with many of the freelancers. We've already highlighted the importance of diversity. So for voices with an accent or a particular style, well, the marketplaces would certainly list a wide range. And obviously the specialists, this is their area of expertise really, as well as anything more complex, like if you needed more than one voice for the same project. Obviously, we're a specialist. We've seen a real demand for other types of voiceover services. The one we're most excited about is audio description. This is something, audio description, it's something that's becoming really important quite quickly, actually. So for any of you who produce video content, then I'd recommend you prepare for this. There'll be regulations about it soon. It's sometimes called video description. It's a form of narration used to provide commentary on the visual elements of social media. So, for example, where there's gaps in the dialogue, a voiceover will describe what's happening. We've got an example for you. We'll play a short video. If I can hand over to Jane. Are you there, Jane?
This kitchen. The dog leans on a clean white bar.
I'm sure there was lots of mud. I shook off so much mud.
A flashback to the dog shaking off mud and water. Earlier, a woman pours Flash into a bucket, then cleans the muddy kitchen floor, bath and countertops. She admires the clean home.
Cleans up the impossible.
Fantastic. Right, I think we're back. And Eleanor, you probably back in control of the slides?
Yep, I think I am.
Lovely. Okay, so right, so if we just go to the next slide then, please.
Okay.
So audio description, it's been around for many years actually, and its main application has been, understandably, is it to be more accessible for the visually impaired. That's really why it's come about. But in the US, it's now becoming quite an essential part of e-learning video content, and that's partly due to regulations like the Equality Act, but it's also because they've recognised that learners don't always want to sit and watch educational video for very long. They want to access this content while driving or cooking or out walking. Fortunately, it's not that expensive. It's quite a good way of just adding it on to your usual video content. The problem you'll find though is that at the moment it's quite difficult to find audio describers. They've got to be trained. They need specialist software, and most of the certainly UK-based describers are under exclusivity agreements with the large broadcaster and media firms. So finding one today, you'd need to approach the specialist voiceover firms. But eventually there should be more trained freelancers available, and we're actively developing training programs for our associate network.
Yeah, so this is our summary. I suppose there are three takeaways all in all, really. The first one is engagement, and the listener is human. You mustn't forget that. They need to feel engaged, and they also need to feel valued. So if you use audio which is only just good enough or recorded by someone's boyfriend on a laptop, it won't sound great coming out of the high quality headphones that more and more people are using these days. And actually, while this is particularly relevant to publicly accessed web videos as well as e-learning, it kind of shows that you as a company will cut corners. So quality is everything, and we would say this because that's what we do. We create audio, it's our passion, but allowing a reasonable budget for voiceovers when you've created incredible content is key. It really is the difference between a good programme and a truly amazing programme. You want your learners to enjoy the experience and come back for more, so it can be a good long-term investment. If you build a long-term relationship with a full-time professional voiceover, the loyalty will be there. But if you buy short clips ad hoc from sites like Fiverr, you may find that buying cheap means you buy twice, or that the people you're using are part-time and unresponsive to emails. And finally, diversity is important too. Very neutral sounding voices are great for longer narrations. There's no reason why they can't have an accent, but they do need to be clear and engaging. There's no limit to the number of different characters you can have in dramatic scenarios, but make sure your audio producer gets all of the levels right so that the sound matches up really well.
And please embrace audience diversity with your content. You know, there's plenty of matching voices out there. So as I've just seen in the comments, we would welcome any questions you may have. Type them in.
Mm-hmm.
Eleanor and Ed, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. What a I've loved listening to your voice, actually, Eleanor. I'm going to watch the recording again.
It's just a shame that I put my face on for no reason.
Oh, I saw your face earlier on, but absolutely brilliant. So lots of applause coming in the chat there. So please do let us know if you have any questions. I've got a couple of questions coming up in the Q&A. Let's have a look, see what we have. So from
Joe, yeah,
If you're new to voiceovers, is there anything people need to know in terms of the format of the files the voiceover creates? So many people are using tools like Articulate. Do the different tools have different requirements?
Yes, lots of different programs need different requirements, and again, a good voiceover will know not necessarily which file format your program will take, but they will ask you to tell us what file format you need. So it might be, for example, on the lower end of the scale, IVR, sort of telephone system files, have a really kind of wacky file format. It's usually a WAV, but a strange one, ULAW WAV. And then I think these days most e-learning programs take MP3 files, but you need to be able to name them in such a way that they just slot right into the audio. And again, most voiceovers will deliver the audio ready to go into the, in whichever format you ask for. So, you ask the voiceover what you want and they'll deliver it to you.
Excellent. Great question, Joan. Thank you. And we have one more, if that's all right, Eleanor. We've got one from Joe. Top tips for recording your own audio.
Well, if you must.
Cheeky Joe.
No, that's right, because people do, and the thing is that it makes sense for us to at least try and promote the best audio that we can. And if for whatever reason you need to record your own, then absolutely go into a quiet space. Don't have anything in your way that will reflect the sound. So, I mean, even maybe sit under your duvet and record it. That's what a lot of people do. I would try and, we always say to invest in the best kit that you possibly can. So if it's something that you're going to be doing for a long time, and it's part of your overall work, I would say get yourself some decent kit, and probably you're talking about spending hundreds or thousands rather than, but it depends on how much you're going to be doing. If it's a one-off, you'll be able to do it on a little travel mic probably, but I'm not really a big fan of good enough. So I would at least say try and get yourself as quiet as possible, and maybe if you're not familiar with the text, just get yourself really familiar with the text so that you're not umming and ahhing all over and it just sounds nice and smooth.
Yeah, fabulous point. And I think Jones added a good point there about Ken Bruce does his Radio 2 show with the blankets hanging, and there's a lot about the room ambience noise, isn't it? So avoiding glass windows, I understand, and flat surfaces for the audio bouncing around.
Yeah, absolutely. Just as much padding as you possibly can.
Yes, I'll work on my padding.
I think we're all working on our padding during lockdown, aren't we?
More biscuits o'clock now. That's been absolutely fascinating. Does anyone have any more questions? Please do let us know. We're here for a little bit longer. I thought it was really interesting, and you covered lots of different aspects. So you've inspired me now to look more into. Certainly when I have my clients for my videos, I give them lots of different choices. And often, as you say, it all depends on the type of video, the audience, whether it's in-house, they might go with somebody, they might not need that professional level. But yeah, fantastic. So we've got some great thank you. And we've got another question. Let's have a look. Oh, Joe. Joe is asking, what are some funny stories from voiceover?
Oh, gosh.
You must have some to share.
Well, I do. I mean, obviously, this is probably an amazing time to plug my podcast, Tales from the Tannoy, because if I'm allowed. There are lots on there. I present a podcast which is kind of on the basis of obviously my husband and I still work together every day, even though one of us is dead, and there are all sorts of sort of weird and wonderful stories surrounding that. But every single voiceover that you hear, whether it's the checkout person, Morrison's, who's saying to put your item in the bag, or the lift going up lady, there's all sorts of different people that you hear every day and you don't realise there's actually a person behind them. So that's kind of what inspired that. So for all the funny stories, go to that. I mean, some of them are not funny, some of them are tragic, but we try and make it quite amusing. I mean, episode 5, there's 2 of us who are both widows, and we're just, the dark humor is it's quite something. I mean, one story that I like is that when I was going down to, I was sort of really missing my husband one time when I was down in London, and I wanted to hear his voice on the Underground, but I didn't hear his voice, but I did hear a busker playing the theme tune from Ghost, and I thought that that was his little joke. So I don't know. I mean, you know, there are lots of, everybody has a strange, there's a lot of outtakes out there. You know, if you follow voiceovers on Twitter, quite often we'll put things in if we're allowed. Obviously, a lot of scripts are under NDA. So you've got to be really careful about what you share and what you don't share.
Absolutely. Well, I would definitely plug your Tales of the Tannoy. I've listened to a couple, but I think there's about 15, isn't there, that to listen to. I started at the beginning, which I think you had a friend interviewing yourself,
That's right.
which was lovely. Yeah, lots more. So do check those out. Joe's very kindly shared the link.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
Eleanor, Ed, if you'd like to put any of your contact details, let people know how they can find you. I can see on the slide there. So is it the best place is your website? Is that right?
I reckon so. Yeah. That will lead you to us quite easily and effectively. So yeah.
Yeah, website or email address is on there. We're pretty responsive. Love to hear from you all.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, on behalf of the eLearning Network and everyone that's joined us today, thank you so much. It's been really insightful. Love this session. For anyone wanting to join our webinars, we've got a new series of webinars coming up, so watch this space. Don't forget there is our YouTube channel with past webinars, and this webinar will be has been recorded and will be up on YouTube for you to either watch again and listen to Eleanor for another 30 minutes and share with your friends and colleagues. And thanks so much. I'll leave the chat open. We'll be here for a little bit longer, but thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye.